I have the pleasure this morning of introducing our next speaker. I was introduced to Sue by listening to her tapes over the past year or so, and as I became part of the convention committee, and I knew that she was going to be speaking here this morning, I decided to call her a few weeks ago and talk to her, introduce myself to her, and she asked me how long I'd been in the program, and I told her about a year and a half, and she said, "Oh God, they're sending me a sick newcomer." I said, no, I volunteered, and she said, "Yep, sick newcomer." And the truth is, I did volunteer. I volunteered because I wanted to be a part of this. I wanted to be a part of picking up Sue at the airport. She has been an inspiration to me in my recovery. I often hear her words in my head, and I stick her tape in my machine often. So it's an honor to be here this morning to introduce Sue D.
Hi, my name's Sue. Is it working better now? Thank you. I'm a very grateful member of the Al-Anon family group because today I love an alcoholic. That wasn't always true. I want to thank Mary Jane and the committee for inviting Keith and I to be here. I want to thank you for the room. My gosh, we're in the presidential suite. We looked at the bed last night, and I thought, I wonder who else has been in here. You almost have to get a stepladder to get into it. But we managed. Has a bidet, a jacuzzi in there. And I asked Mary Jane, I said, I don't see any coffee pot. She said, when you're in the presidential suite, you don't make your own coffee. So she very graciously got coffee for us this morning, and it's neat. We went up on the roof last night so we could see nothing in the dark, and I look forward to this weekend. It's really neat, and I thought it was neat for them to read the statement of gratitude to Al-Anon, from Alcoholics Anonymous. I will forever be grateful that Alcoholics Anonymous gave us the 12 steps of recovery. But then if we hadn't had you, we wouldn't have needed those steps. You shared your disease with us so generously. And it's neat. I heard a speaker here a while back say the difference between an alcoholic and a dog. Dogs quit whining when you let them in. And I want to thank Kathy for picking us up last night. She's typical Al-Anon. She told us that she thought she was in love one time because it was painful. And I love newcomers. Newcomers just light up my life. It's so exciting to me to share with newcomers. I was in a meeting here a while back over in L.A., and after the meeting, this lady came up to me and said her husband had been sober for 2 years. They'd been going to a marriage counselor, and that he had sent her to Al-Anon. And she said, there's nothing wrong with me. She said, we have knocked down, drag out fights just over take out the trash. And I said, well, I never got hit or hurt unless I was in somebody's face. And she said, no, it's not my fault. And so after the meeting, she came up to me, and there was an AA meeting next door, and she said, I'd like for you to meet my husband. And I said, okay. And I stuck my hand out to shake his, and she said, she wants to shake your hand. And so she lifted his hand and put his hand out. And I looked at her, and she goes, he's blind. I said, Jesus Christ, before he hits you, he's got to find you. But she wasn't any space. Yeah, the typical story about Al-Anons that just tells it how it is for me is these two Al-Anons went to the zoo. And they're going around looking at the different animals, and they get up to the gorilla's cage, and he's standing real close to the cage. And so this one Al-Anon says, I want to just feel his fur. I've always wondered what it felt like, And so she reaches in and she pets his fur, and he grabs her in through the cage, and he takes her back up in his cage, and he's beating her and molesting her and mauling her and all this stuff. And her Al-Anon friend runs off, gets a zookeeper, and they come back and they shoot the gorilla with a tranquilizing gun. He just falls on her and crushes her. Paramedics come and they take her to the hospital, and a couple days later, Al-Anon friend goes in there to see her. And she's laying there all black and blue and beat up and in traction and everything, and her friend looks at her and says, "My gosh, you must be in a lot of pain." The Al-Anon looked at her and she said, "You just don't know. He hasn't called, he hasn't written." And I think that pretty much says it. So, but it's neat to be here. I want to thank you. And Keith and I have a lot of fun today. We went through a lot of things in our life before we got here, and I know today that it took every one of those things in order for me to get here right now. Yeah, and he used to be so drunk and so mean all the time. And I sat in the airport yesterday, and these two, in Chicago, we changed planes, and we was sitting there by the gate, and these two older people came up. And this older man came up, and he told the lady at the gate, he said, "I need to go get my wife, I'll be right back." And he came back with this real frail lady and said, "We need a wheelchair." And he couldn't hardly walk, and she couldn't. And the lady at the gate says, "Well, go tell somebody, go get a wheelchair, and we'll take you on. They can't walk, but they got to go get a wheelchair." And I sit there, and I watched an alcoholic that used to be very mean and ugly and didn't care about people help those people. And that man was my husband. And I am so grateful that God gives me the opportunity to see how the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has worked in his life. And he was very gracious and very kind to those people. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous has done for the man in my life. And I don't like to miss those opportunities. See, I get to see what I've learned is gratitude, and that's action. And he took the action to help someone else, and it made me grateful. And so I have a lot of gratitude in my life today for the way we are. Because the person you see here standing today is not the person that came into this program. Because you see, I was very violent and very hostile and very ugly myself. And I wasn't raised that way. I did not grow up in an alcoholic home. I grew up so-called normie home. My dad worked in the oil fields, and we lived in a trailer house, and we followed the oil rigs around through western Kansas, Oklahoma, and the Texas Panhandle. And we moved all over, and I always felt like I never belonged anywhere, because by the time I'd start meeting friends or making friends, it was time to move on. And so I grew up with those feelings of inadequacy, not belonging, and never having anyone to feel close to. And when I was in about 6th grade, we moved to a little town in the Texas Panhandle called Perryton, Texas, and we stayed there. We chose to stay there. My folks bought a home, and shortly after that, my father passed away with cancer, and my older sister had married and had her own family by then, and that left my younger brother and my mom and I at home. And after a period of time, my mother started dating, and I resented that. And I resented it a lot. And I'd be the one standing at the door when she came home saying, "Do you know what time it is?" Nobody ever taught me how to do that. I just pre-Al-Anons intuitively know. And her and I started having a lot of problems because I resented the things that she was doing. And I'm the teenager, and I'm babysitting, I'm taking care of my younger brother. I'm supposed to be having fun. And I started rebelling, and I started looking for love in all the wrong places, and I ended up in San Antonio, Texas, in an unwed mother's home. And I went down there for a period of time, and it's the only place that I ever felt like I belonged. And today I know it was the common bond that I had with the other ladies that were in there. You know, just like we have in this program, it's a common bond of the common problem, and we're all working on the same thing. And I stayed in there for a while, and I gave that child up for adoption, and I'm grateful for that, because at 16, no way could I be a parent. And I got out of there, and I went back home, and my mom was going to those honky-tonks, and I wanted to go. And I remember the first time I walked in one of those places, my gosh, it was rowdy, it was smoky, it was loud, and people were fighting, and I loved it. It's like, yes, here I am. And I started watching this cowboy move the room, and everywhere he went, something was happening. It was usually a fight, but it was happening. And a fight broke out, and he came running past me, and he said, honey, let me know when the fight's over. And he ran the woman's restroom to hide. And like a good potential Al-Anon, I was given directions, so I stood on duty. And so when he came out, he said, honey, would you like to dance? And it was the last dance. And usually those dances are slow dances, the last one, where you can rub up against each other and get ready to go home. And this was a fast dance, and it just kept getting faster and faster and faster, and God, I loved it. It's like he got me downtown in the fast lane right now. He did for me what nothing else had ever done for me. As I look back on that, as my friend Arbutus in Texas said, you know, the only difference between an alcoholic and an Al-Anon is the obsession. His is the booze and mine's the boozer. And boy, that was true for me. He called me up and asked me for a date. My mom said, no, you're not going out with him. He's older than you. He's been married before, and he's in trouble all the time. And I said, I don't care. And he came and picked me up, and we walked outside, and there's no car. And I said, wait a minute. You know, my dates pick me up in cars. And he said, no, you don't understand. Had a DWI, and I've lost my license forever. I totaled my car. And I said, no problem, I have one. And so we got in my car, and I knew what to do. I took him to the drive-in movie, and I knew when you get there, you kiss and smooch and steam up the windows. And we got the movie, and we sat there, and we watched the movie. And I thought, whoa, this must be what it's like to be with a more mature man. And then it dawned on me, he had a six-pack of beer between his legs that he was more interested in than me. And that set up the obsession in me to compete. I wanted to be number one in that man's life, and I started from that point on trying to be number one in his life, no matter what the price. And we started dating, and he'd do things that I didn't like stand me up. And he'd call me the next day, and I'd say, where were you last night? He'd say, well, I don't know. Why? I said, we were supposed to go out last night. And he'd say, no problem, I'll come over tonight. And I'd go, okay. Yeah, and then I'd be mad at myself because I was going to give him the what fors, you know. And so before he'd get to the house, I'd think, I'll show him what it feels like. You know, because I'd get that knot in the gut, you know, and it just hurt. And if he only understood how it felt, then he'd change. And so I'd try chug-a-lugging a few beers before he'd get there. And then he'd walk in the house, and he'd look at me, and he said, well, you're not going. And I'd say, why not? He'd say, because you're drunk. I said, well, I go with you when you're drunk. He said, I know, you hang out with drunks, I don't. And that's the way it was for us. You know, it took whatever it took. And I tried a lot of things. And he got a draft notice, and we decided we couldn't live without each other. And we ran off to Amarillo, and we got married. And shortly after that, his grandparents and I decided that what he needed was go back to school. And we moved to a little town called Stillwater, Oklahoma. And Keith started going to school there. Shortly after we got there, our daughter Simone was born. And I remember when they handed her to me, thinking, thank God she's a girl. Because Keith was a drunk, his dad was a drunk, and his granddad was a town drunk. And I knew if we had a boy, he'd carry on the family tradition. I didn't know that alcoholism is a family disease. And it doesn't care what sex, color, race, or creed you are. It takes you to the gates of insanity and hell, and you don't even have to drink booze to get there. And Keith was going to school, and many times he'd come home and say, Sue, I can't handle this. I'd started working. He said, you're working. My folks are paying for school, and I'm just going to class, and I can't handle this. I got to have just 2 beers. I'm going to go out with the guys and just have 2 beers. And I'd say, but you always get in trouble when you do that. And he said, I won't this time, I promise. And he'd be gone for a while, and there'd be a knock on the door, and I'd open the door, and there'd be Keith and a cop, and they'd say, if you'll keep him here this time, we won't arrest him. It was like people started giving him back to me. It's like it was my responsibility to take care of him. And so I tried to start doing that the best of my ability. And many times I had to do that with a lot of force. Because you got to get an alcoholic's attention before you can talk to him. And I was one of those kind of pre-Al-Anons that got in the face. And I shook the finger. And every time I did that, I'd get hit. And after 2 years, we was there in school for 4 years, and Keith got a 2-year degree. Typical alky. And I took all the credit. Because if it hadn't have been for me, he couldn't have done it, because he'd been to school many times before that. And I started taking the credit. I needed the validation. I needed the approval. I needed to know that I could do something, because the disease of alcoholism started telling me that I was nothing and I was a nobody and I didn't count. And Keith came home one day and he said, I want to move to California. And I said, nope, not going to do that. Not going to move to California. It's too wild and crazy out there. I'll never raise children in California. He said, babe, you don't understand. He said, you go to California, you can sit in a restaurant and you can have cocktails and you can drink like a lady. You won't have to drink out of paper sacks anymore. You won't have to go to these honky-tonks anymore. And I'm going, yeah, I deserve that. Because I wanted to be a lady, because no matter what I ever did, I never felt like a lady. And so we hurried up and we packed our stuff, and Keith built this big wooden box and sprayed it bright blue, put it on wheels, and we hooked it behind our station wagon, and we hooked it for California. And took us 30 days to make that trip. It should have taken 3. But it depended on what he took or what he drank as to how far we went, and there was days that we just stayed put because I didn't know we had choices. And we got to California, and he started working in the oil fields, which we had left in Oklahoma. And he came home one night, and I'd been staying home with Simone, and I was going to be a good mother, and there was many times that he wouldn't come home, and I'd be vacuuming or I'd be do something, and I'd just be, vacuuming, and when he gets home, I'm going to say this, and then he'll say this, and I'll say this, and Simone would look at me, and she'd go, Mommy, who are you talking to? And I'd say, leave me alone, I'm busy. I wasn't doing anything, but I was too busy to be a mom. And he came home one night and he said, baby, you want to go out to dinner? And I said, yeah, because you see, I was waiting on that because I wanted to be a lady. Because I knew that whatever I did, what that was going to make me a lady, because I didn't feel like a lady in here. And so we got all dressed up and we went to this real nice restaurant, and we walked in there and everybody was dressed up, and I'm going, yeah, this is where I belong. And they seated us in that restaurant, and they came over and asked us if we wanted cocktails, and I said, yeah, because you see, if somebody else mixes them, you don't get drunk. And we didn't leave Simone out at all. We ordered her a Shirley Temple, and we sat there and they brought our drinks over, and Keith said, I want to toast to the good life, babe. And we sat there and we toasted to the good life. And God, it was wonderful. And I counted. He had 10 to my 1. And I knew exactly how many he had. And I watched those people in that restaurant, and they were sitting there with these long-stem crystal glasses, and I'd never had anything like that. Because growing up in a trailer house and being called oil field trash, you don't have crystal. You don't have those kind of things. And I watched these people, and they had those glasses, and they had stuff in them, and they were swishing it. And God, they looked classy. And if I could just do that, I'd be a lady. Because, you see, I was always judging my insides with your outsides. If I could just feel the way you look. I had to come here to find out that happiness is an inside job. And so they came over to us, and they took our order and asked us if we'd like wine with our dinner. And I said, you bet. And so I came over, and he set the glasses down in front of Keith and I, and he poured Keith just a little bit and said, is it okay? I said, what do you mean, is it okay? He drank stuff in Oklahoma that had things floating in it. Pour mine. And they poured mine. And I sat there in all my smug and arrogance, and I swished it just like everybody else had. And I sniffed it. I didn't know what in the heck I was doing that for, but they did it, so I did it. And I felt like $1,000,000 till I tipped it up to drinking it, and I look across the table, and Keith's drinking out of the carafe. And I just yell at him, what are you doing? And he yells back at me, I'm drinking. What's it look like I'm doing? And I'm going, look, now everybody's looking at us. And he'd look over, what are you looking at? And I go, now they are looking at us. You know, and Simone would slide under the table. And I'd holler at the waiter, and I'd say, come here. And he'd come over at the table, and I'd say, bring us our food. And he'd say, no, you aren't eating here. And I go, why not? And he said, because you don't know how to act. And I'm going, whoa. And we're being 86'd out of the restaurant, and we can never go back, because as we're walking out, he's talking to everybody in sign language. And we get home, and I get right in his face, don't you ever treat us like that again. And he says, Sue, get out of my face. And I take one step closer. And I said, if you ever treat us like that again. And he said, if you don't get out of my face, I'm going to hit you. And I'd take one step closer, and he'd hit me, and the knockdown, drag-out fight would be on. And we was having that fight, and he had me on the bed, and he had his hands around my throat, and he was choking the living tar out of me. And I thought, my God, if he doesn't stop, I'm going to die. I'm just going to die right here. And I looked up in his face, and he's looking down at me with all the intensity he has. And it dawned on me, whoa, I am number one in his life. He's not thinking about booze or nothing but me. It was negative attention, but it was all mine. And I started acting like that all the time, just to get his attention. And we'd have those fights, and when he was done with me, that rage would be inside of me. And what do you do with it? Where does it go? Alcoholism's a family disease. The only thing I knew to do with it was turn around, and when I got turned around, there was Simone. And I'd take the rest of it out on Simone. I didn't know how to be a mother because, you see, I have the disease of alcoholism, and it takes all those things away. And I remember banging her head up against the wall one time, and she says, Mommy, I know why you're doing this. You're showing Daddy you can act just like him. And I didn't know that, but she did. We think our children are not affected by this disease. We think they don't know. Daddy's drunk, but what's wrong with Mama? They know. They know more than we know. And many times we'd have those fights, and I'd call the cops, Simone would call the cops, or the neighbors would call the cops, and Keith and I started fighting. He had been a cowboy. He always had a gun, and I hated guns. They scared the tar out of me because they go off and they shoot things you don't want them to shoot. And it's like, you won't treat me that way. And so I picked up a butcher knife, and I started fighting back with that butcher knife, and we'd stand toe-to-toe with that gun and that knife. And he'd put it right on the end of my nose, and he'd say, if you don't shut up, I'm going to shoot you. And I'd stick my knife right in his stomach, and I'd say, you go first. He'd say, what are you talking about? If I shoot you, you're dead. And I'd say, I know. But when I go backwards, the momentum's going to knock the knife forwards, and we're both going to go out at the same time, so go for it. And he'd look at me and he'd say, "You're crazy." And I was. And we had a fight one night, and he went off, and he didn't come home. And that makes me angry. And I sitting there, and I laid in that bed, and I thought, God, please let him die out there. God, please let something happen to him. Don't let him come home. Just let him get killed out there. And then the guilt and the remorse came over me, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what am I saying? God, please bring him home. And I cried myself to sleep. Next morning I woke up and Keith still wasn't home, and that wasn't his pattern, and I was angrier then than I had been before. And I got Simone up and I said, "Come on, Simone, we're going to go try to find your dad." Now, I didn't know where to go, but I thought, well, I'll start down at this after hours in Orange that was about 12 miles from our house, because we used to go down there a lot. And I thought, I'll start out down there, and then I'll just go from there. And so we got down there about 2 blocks from there. I looked over on this side street by this house, and there's Keith's pickup sitting over there. And this house had motorcycles all over the lawn. By then, Keith had become the biker. And I was the most afraid of that image. It was the meanest one of all. And I thought, damn him, I'm going to fix him. He's in there in that house, and he's drinking, and he's using with those Hells Angels, and I'm going to fix him. Because I love the sweet taste of revenge. And so we go over there. I take the Keith's pickup out of my purse, and we walk over that pickup when we drive that pickup 2 blocks from that house. And we walk back to my car, and I drive my car 2 blocks in front of the pickup. Then we walk back the pickup, and I drive the pickup 2 blocks in front of my car. And it only took me 4.5 hours, but I got both of those vehicles home, and I felt good. And I was a good mom. I didn't leave Simone unattended, neither one of them. She walked every step of the way with me. And God, I felt good. And I was home for a while, and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it's Keith. And he said, "Babe, come and get me." Wow. And I very smugly said, "No. You have one of your friends bring you home." He goes, "Friends? I don't know what you're talking about." I said, "You're over there in that house with those bikers, and you're drinking and you're using. You just have..." He said, "I don't know what house you're talking about." He said, "I'm in jail." I go, "Jail? How did you get in there without me? You aren't supposed to go to jail unless I put you in there." And we started having a big fight on the phone about where he's supposed to be and not supposed to be. So I tell Simone, "Okay, your daddy's in jail. We got to go get your daddy out of jail." And we go down there and we bail him out. And she goes, "Let's get Daddy." And I said, "No, I wasn't going to take him home this morning, and I'm not going to take him home now. He can get home the best way he can. He doesn't deserve any better." And all the haranguing started, putting him down to his own daughter. So we get home, and a few hours later the doorbell rings, and I go to the door, and there's Keith. And he always did the dumbest thing. He always introduced himself to me as if I didn't know him. I'd say, "What do you want?" He'd say, "This is Keith Drum. I live here, And I'd go, "Not anymore." And he'd say, "Sue, please let me in." And I'd say, "You beg. You beg." And he'd get down on his knees in front of our house, in front of the neighbors and everybody, and beg to get back into his own home, robbing that man of his dignity. And when I thought he had enough, I told him, "Okay, you can come in now." He got up off his knees, and he turned around and looked in the driveway, and he said, "By the way, hon, thanks for bringing my pickup home. I wanted to die. I hadn't done that to be nice. I never wanted to help him do anything." And we had a fight one night, and he passed out on me and on his stomach. Now, you don't ignore me when I'm talking to you. And he made a very almost fatal mistake. Because I sat there and looked at him, and I thought, damn him. He's not going to ignore me this way. I have had it. He is done. And I took my butcher knife, and I just stabbed him all over his back, ever as hard as I could, saying, "God, please help me put this in. God, please help me do away with this. I didn't know that this I was talking about was the insanity of the disease of alcoholism. And I have it. And then I thought, my gosh, what am I doing? What am I doing? And I started crying, and I cried myself to sleep one more time. And the next morning, Keith woke up, and he goes, my God, what's wrong with my back? And I said, I don't know, let me see, because you can't tell him. And I looked at his back, and I said, you must have broken out with acne of the back. You're drinking all that rock gut whiskey. I said, but don't worry about it, honey. I'll get the rubbing alcohol, and I'll fix you. And I loved it. Music to Al-Anon ears. Yeah, it was great. But I know today that I had to do everything that I had to do in order to get to you. And I hope I never forget the last drunk in our home. Because you see, if I forget where I come from, I might return. Our past is our greatest asset, it says in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't ever want to go back where I came from. And may all have 19 years in this program. And I have never forgotten what it was like in our home. And I hope you never forget what it was like before you got here, whether you're in Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon. Because they say our past is our greatest asset, and if I forget, I might have to go back and find it out again, and I don't want to learn that lesson anymore, because I might not make it back. I don't believe that I will ever get locked up in a nut ward. My kind of insanity will lead me to death or into prison somewhere, because I don't know how to stop. My insanity is rage. And I don't know how to stop it once it gets started. This program has put a stopgap on my anger. And it has taught me how to take those negative feelings and turn them around in my life and make them assets in my life today. And today when I start feeling that anger come up, I use it as energy to do things that I procrastinate on. And I work it out, and I get rid of it, and I don't have to take it out on anybody anymore. And so I don't ever want to forget who I am. And that last fight in our home, I looked over at Keith, and he had Simone up against the wall doing the things to her he had always done to her, but it was like I saw it for the very first time. And a feeling came over me that I felt nothing. Because in the disease of alcoholism, all the feelings go away. We stuff them down until there's nothing left anymore. And I believe that's where I hit a bottom. And I believe every Al-Anon has to hit a bottom just like every alcoholic. Or else we can't do what is expected in the next 12 steps ahead of us. The surrender. Every one of us in this disease has to hit a surrender. And I looked at Keith and I didn't feel anything, and I looked at him and I didn't grab my knife, I didn't scream and I didn't yell. And very calmly I said, Keith, I don't love you anymore. And I said, but I don't hate you either. And if you got to be a skid row bum, because that's what I thought happened to drunks, then that's what you got to do. But Simone and I ain't going to go any further with you. And we got some things together, and we walked out of that house very quietly for the very last time. And to me, a surrender is giving up everything. I didn't care who got the house, or the checkbook, or the dog, or the clothes. I didn't care. I wanted out of the insanity. I couldn't do it anymore. And we just took a few things that we could take with us, and Simone and I left. And I don't remember what happened in the next 4 days. I guess Al-Anons call them whiteouts. I don't know. But Simone needed some things for school, and she begged me to go back to the house. And so we went back to that house, and we walked in, and it was dark, and we were scared. Because we didn't know what to find in that house, because there had been a time that Simone brought home a little shaggy dog, and she was sitting there loving on that dog. And I understand today what happened. I didn't then. And Keith jumped up out of his chair and he grabbed his gun and he shot that dog in our living room. And he yelled, "Nobody, you can't love anything more than you love me." And nobody cried in that home that day. Because if you cry, you're weak and you might be next. And so when we walked in that house that night, we didn't know what to expect. And we walked around in there very quietly and looked around. We couldn't find Keith, and we went into the bedroom, and we found him face down on the bedroom floor. And we thought he was dead, so we kicked him. And he rolled over, and he said, "Sue, please help." And I believe that's when I took the first step. I believe that's when God put some words in, a word in my mouth that I could never say ever before in my entire life. And I looked at Keith and I said, the hardest word it is for us to say to drunks. The hardest word, bar none, one word. No. No, I can't help you. If you want help, you help yourself. And Keith got up and went and made some phone calls, and he called Alcoholics Anonymous, thank God. Because you see, 4 years before that, I'd taken him. I'd gone to a lawyer, and he'd told me, if you love him, take him to Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I went home and gave him the good news. And I didn't know he was on a court card. And I took him to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I sat in the parking lot. I took him to that meeting, and I sat in the parking lot. And when he got out of the car, I told him, I said, "What time's that meeting over?" He said, 10. And I said, "I'll tell you something, dude. You come out of that door before 10, I'll gut you." And I sat in that parking lot with my butcher knife every Monday night for 4 months and kept him sober. You told me I couldn't keep a drunk sober when I got here, but I did for that 4-month period. And when I thought he had gotten it, I let him go by himself, and he hadn't learned nothing. He got struck drunk immediately. So that night when I said no, I knew I couldn't help. I knew I had done everything possible to help a drunk get sober. My kind of love kills drunks. Because I become the reason. By getting in the face, making the excuses. And so he called Alcoholics Anonymous. And the doorbell rang, and I went to the door, and there's a little gray-headed, shriveled-up man standing there, and I'm thinking, oh, geez, why don't they send the big ones on these trips? And I opened the door, and little Jack came in. And I stood there and I watched Alcoholics Anonymous perform the miracle of the 12th step. And he asked me to go with him to take Keith to a detox, and so I did. And then little Jack took me back home, and he sat in the driveway with me. And he said, "I've seen Keith around here before. Something's happened to him. I think he wants it this time." And he said, "There's a program of recovery for you called Al-Anon." And I said, "No, I don't think so. I don't need it. You see, if he quits drinking, I'll be okay." He said, "I don't think so." He said, "I'm going to tell you something very valuable." He said, "I've seen it happen many times, and today I can say I've seen it happen many times. That a sober alcoholic can't go home to an old idea and stay sober. He'll either have to end up drunk or he'll have to leave to maintain his sobriety." And he said, "Let's go in the house and talk to Simone. She's afraid. She's wondering what's happening to her daddy." And he went in there and he told her that if she loved her daddy, the only way she could help him was go to a program called Al-Anon. Thank God for little Jack. He's still in our life today. And he goes around bragging how successful he is at Al-Anon 12 steps. But he did it exactly the way the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about. He carried the message to the family. And I am so grateful for that. Simone and I started going to one meeting a week because I didn't need it. And before they let Keith out of the detox, they called us in and they said, they sat there and talked to us and they said, you need Al-Anon. And I said, no, I don't. And I stood up and I put my hands on my hips and I said, look, I have paid the bills, I have worked, I have bailed him out of jail, I have raised Simone, I have done this, and this. And she says, then if you're so perfect, why you have to stand here and yell at me? First time anybody had ever made me look at myself. And I sat down and I started crying. And then she looked at Simone. She said, Simone, how do you feel about your father? And Simone said, I hate his guts. And I looked at Keith with all my smug and arrogance and I said, good. Good, I'm glad you're hearing that sober. I've tried to tell you that many times. And then she asked Simone, how do you feel about your mother? And she looked at me and she said, I hate her guts. And I knew I needed help. I knew that I was just as sick and had caused as much damage in that home as the drunk did, probably more. If I'd just let him come home and pass out or do whatever drunks do when you don't get in their face, we probably wouldn't have had the violence in that home that we had. I take responsibility for 85-90% of the violence that went on in that home. Because, you see, this program's taught me to look at me, thank God. And I started going back to Al-Anon for me. And I have a formula for going to my meetings today. I don't believe that anybody can go to one meeting a week and get this thing by osmosis. Because to me, if that's what I'm doing, that's the way I'm trying to get. 2 meetings a week I can uncomfortably maintain, and 3 or more meetings a week I can grow. And I found out my first character defects were impatient and greed. I want it all, and I want it now. So the more I go, the more I get. And when I went back to those meetings for myself, the cover of the Al-Anon Big Book at that time said, Living with an Alcoholic. And I saw it, and I knew you knew. It's like you started answering my questions before I asked. And I felt comfortable in there. And I was sitting there, and this one lady that was so neat, she just kept giving me a lot of attention and telling me, keep coming back, and you're going to be okay, honey. And she was so sweet, and she was so loving to me. And I asked that lady to be my sponsor. And then I don't know what happened to her. But she started telling me things like, I don't care. And I'd go up to her and I'd say, what do I do about this or this or this? She goes, what do you want to do? And I'd tell her, and she'd say, you do exactly the opposite. And I'd say, I don't want to do that. And she'd say, I don't care. And I asked her one time, I said, wait a minute, what is this I don't care stuff? I said, all over these places it has we care. She said, I want to tell you something. I don't care about hurting your feelings. You know how to handle that. We're here to save your life. And that's the kind of sponsorship I have in my life today. I have never been coddled in this program. I have never been babysitting in this program, and I've gotten my feelings hurt a lot. Because to me, a sponsor is someone that tells me the truth about me. And thank God I have that kind of sponsorship. Hard-nosed, old-timer sponsorship. They got this program out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the only place they had, the only literature they had. And she told me to read the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous because the Al-Anon literature says to learn everything you can about the disease of alcoholism, and I don't know a better place to learn it than there. And she told me I had to read that book. And I read that book, and then she started me through the steps. And she made me write every one of them. Every one of them. And I got to the fourth step, and I used the blueprint for progress and answered all those questions in there, yes, no, maybe sometimes, 55% of the time. And I gave it to her, and I said, I'm done. And she looked at it, and she said, I don't think so. And she got me into the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous one more time, and she showed me the 4-column method to take an inventory with in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I am so grateful for that, because if I hadn't have done that columns, I wouldn't see me. The first column was resentment, the second column's the cause, the third column's what it did to me, how it made me feel, and the fourth column is the I got you column. What part did I play? And I got to do all the first 3 columns, and then I called her and I said, I don't get it. I don't get the 4th column. She said, you get on your knees and you ask your God to put the words in the pencil that you need to see. And so I did that. And when I got up and I started to write, it was like a video. My first resentment was Keith. It was the violence. How did I feel? Less than, like a nobody, like I didn't count. And I got that 4th column I started writing after I prayed to God for help. And it was like a video going in front of me. I could hear Keith say, get out of my face. I could see me shaking my finger and standing in his face. It was my fault. All that I caused. And God was the second resentment. He never helped me. He rejected me, I thought. And I got to that 4th column, and I could hear myself saying, God, don't let him drink today. I was giving God direction. I wasn't asking for help. I wasn't saying, thy will be done. And I got to see who I really was. Smug and arrogant and self-righteous, dominating. All those things that are ugly. And I said, my God, what am I going to do? And my sponsor said, you're going to go the 6th step. And I wrote all those character defects down. She said that was the 6th step. And the 7th step, she told me to turn them over and work on the positive. Hate. Made a commitment to my God and to myself to become a lover. She told me how to turn every one of those character defects into assets in my life, and told me to get on my knees and ask God to take the bad side and make a commitment to work on the positive. And I got to make my list of amends, and I was on there too. And so was God. And then I got to make my direct amends to my family and to people as they came into my life. And she told me that, the child that I gave up, it says in that 9th step, except when to do so would injure them or others. And she said, you don't go back into people's lives that have moved on. If it's ever necessary for you to make those amends direct, God will put them in your life. And it'll be God's work, not yours. And so those people that I've had to stay the hell out of their lives, and that's making amends. And then I get to look at myself every day and promptly admit it when I'm wrong. And I get to do my meditation in the mornings. And I talk to my God, I read my literature, I talk to my God, I report into duty. And then I get to do the hardest thing it was for me when I first got here, and it still works today, and I did it this morning. I go to that mirror and I say, good morning, Sue, I love you. And there's somebody there looking back today that loves me. She's there for me today, and it's me. You gave me a person back that I never knew existed before. You gave me a husband in my life that I could love the person and detach from the disease. And today he's my entertainment. You taught me how to be a mother. And you told me that I wasn't responsible for her life, that I would made a commitment to my God to just take care of her while she was in my life, and to be supportive of her and to help direct her in a direction, and I tried doing that the best of my ability. And we became a family. And she kept going to Al-Anon. It took Simone a year and a half of us forcing her to go to Al-Anon because she didn't want to, before she got it. And I'll never forget the day that I knew she was getting it. I stand in her bedroom and I was haranguing on her because her bedroom looked like hell. And she looked at me and stood up real tall and strong, and she said, "Mama wouldn't talk to me like that if I was you." I said, "Yeah, and why not?" She said, "Because you're going to feel real bad and you got to take a 10th step with me." And we all started getting involved in service. And you know, it was neat. Last night we walked in the hospitality room, and there was a couple of ladies in there that we've been on convention committees with ourselves. And we came clear across the United States to meet somebody from home, because God lets these kids that are doing service together be together. And it was really neat to walk in there and see them. You see, God's world is so small. Don't do something today that's going to bite you in the ass 5 years from now. Because this life has been good to us. It's been real good to us. And there's been some surrenders in this program for us. We've had to go through life and make surrenders. But we've been willing to do that because, you see, you're here for us. We have a God in our life. And we walk with you on one hand and God on the other hand, and we can make it through anything with that combination. You gave us tools to live by. We have a family that's supportive of each other. I love Keith more than I ever knew I would ever love anybody. He's my entertainment today. I had to learn things like it's not what you say, it's how you say it and when. I had to learn things like keep your mouth shut when not asked for an opinion. And that was hard. That was really hard for me. I had to learn to say things like, "You could be right," knowing the whole time he ain't. And I had to learn how to allow Simone to grow up and go through her own pains of growing up, and it wasn't easy. And she had started a modeling course when she was in junior high, and she kept doing that as she went through school, and she kept pursuing that career. She's still in that career. She's an international model today, and she's a very beautiful lady, and she lives in Milan, Italy, and she's lived there for about 9 years. And she'll be 32 in May. And she comes home every year at Christmas. She's engaged to an Italian. He's been to our home. We don't understand him. He doesn't understand us. And I just treat him like a drunk. You can't tell them anything either, you know. And we have a lot of fun, you know. She's brought Italian Al-Anon ladies home with her that she sponsors. And they've spent the holidays in our home. This fellowship is a worldwide fellowship. Simone is very active in the program of Al-Anon over there. She's helped translate literature into Italian, worked with World Service. They've reported her to World Service in New York a lot. First time they called New York, they just told her, "Yeah, we know her, folks." Because, you see, I stand up for the principles of this program because I don't want it lost. There's so many things watering down this program today. And we're forgetting where we came from. So I'm very controversial. I believe in Al-Anon's working the steps just like it says in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I just got through going through the 12 steps in my Friday night step study meeting, my home group. My home group in that Friday night step study uses the 12 steps out of the Al-Anon 12 and 12, and we read out of the AA 12 and 12 because Bill Wilson dedicated that book to Al-Anon in 1972. Now, some of you can say that's wrong. I don't think so. So I was talking to my sponsor the other day about going through those steps after we went through it, and she's got 40-some years in this program. And I said the question was asked in that meeting that Al-Anon does not have any promises in its literature. Why not? She says because Al-Anon doesn't have a program. We work Alcoholics Anonymous program, and they gave us their promises, so we have some. She's never lied to me. And I'm into recovery, and I've been into recovery for almost 19 years, and I believe everything that lady's ever told me, because I've checked her out. And I love the program that I've given today. I love my life today. I love the support. I love the camaraderie, the fellowship. I love the steps, and I love my God, and my God loves me, and I know that because He lets me do things I never dreamed possible of doing. And one of the things that I get to do today that's the most rewarding and humbling things that I get to do in my program is that for the last 6 years I've been able to have a panel in a woman's prison. And it took 3 years for us to get in there, and I knew there were women in there just like me that were in there because of Him. And that panel means more to me. When we first started going in there, those ladies were so hostile. And today they're so loving. One of my best friends in that prison was one of the Manson girls. She asked me one time, how do I make amends to my father? And I explained the 8th and the 9th step to her. And then I didn't see her for a while, and she came back, and she said, Sue, it works. The wall came down between my dad and I. He's a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he was in an AA meeting the night that I did what I did. And I never knew how to make amends to him for that. There's a lady in there that has tattoos all over her, clear up to her neck. And I asked her one time, I said, were you drunk and loaded and you got all those tattoos on? She said, no, son, I'm an Al-Anon, just like you. I was sober when I got these tattoos. And I said, my God, that must have hurt. She said it did. But it's the only thing that would take away the pain on the inside. And I knew what she was talking about. This month, the topic of our meeting in that prison was there are no victims, there's just volunteers. Can you imagine in a prison? It was one of the best meetings I've ever sit in. I will forever be grateful of what you have given us. Because you see, my God used you to get to me. God works through people. Each one of us is an instrument to carry God's message to the person that still suffers. And you were there for me when I came. And I have a responsibility to be here for the newcomers and for my family and to be the best example that I can be on a daily basis of this program. And I try doing that the best of my ability. And it's not always easy. But it's a lot better than it used to be. And I don't like making amends, and so I'm real careful about what I do today. and I very seldom have to make amends. I love working with newcomers, and I love sponsorship, because those are the things that have turned my life around. My God used my sponsor to let me hear. And I was talking to a gal the other day that chooses to call me sponsor. And I was sharing some things with her, and in the middle of the sentence I said, God, that is so good. I got to remember to use that myself. And I knew God was using me as an instrument to get to her. If you're new and you're sitting in this program, please don't leave. Please don't leave 5 minutes before your miracle happens, because it's waiting on you. If you're impatient and you can't handle it, go to more meetings. It works. I always like to close with a story that just exemplifies how my God works through you. And it's about a little boy that was sitting in bed one night, and there was a thunder, lightning storm, and hail going on outside, and he got scared. And so he ran in and he got in bed with his mom and dad. And he's laying there and he was shivering, and his dad cuddled him up, and he goes, Son, what's wrong with you? He said, Daddy, I was afraid. He said, I was afraid in there. I was in there all by myself, and I got scared. And his daddy cuddled him up closer, and he said, Son, you didn't have to be afraid in there. You weren't alone. God was in there with you. And he looked up to his daddy, and he said, Yeah, Daddy, I know, but I needed something with skin on it. And that's what you are. You're my skin on it. And I want to thank you so much. You've turned my life around. Because you see, when I got here, I thought I had it all together. And I know today we've got it all. Thank you.